Because of the variations in site conditions, the user must carry out a task-specific risk assessment or method statement prior to works commencing to formulate a site-specific safe system of work. This animation is intended to provide sufficient product-specific guidance on planning, handling, installing, maintaining and removing MGF trench boxes to allow the safe system of work to be compiled. Boxes should not be used in very weak ground, especially very soft clays and peats, or where significant groundwater is present. Prior to the job starting, it is essential to give a site briefing outlining the scope of the proposed works and exactly what each person's roles and responsibilities are. It is essential that if anything changes with the site layout, ground conditions or temporary works designs, then work must stop immediately and the temporary works coordinator or temporary works supervisor should be informed. A revised temporary works design and RAMs may be required prior to starting the works again. Prior to assembling the trench boxes, all components should be inspected. Trench boxes are very heavy pieces of equipment and must only be installed by competent groundwork contractors only. There are two main methods for building up telescopically adjusted trench boxes, which changes depending on the width of the system. The first method is generally suitable for trench widths of up to 2 meters. To build up the struts, place the inner strut within the outer strut and secure using a pin and R-clip. Refer to the MGF technical file for the strut build-up data. To locate the telescopic strut within the trench box, attach a suitably sized bow shackle through one of the pin securing holes. Lift the strut using a single leg chain and lower carefully within one of the strut pockets on the panel. Throughout this operation, be mindful of all finger trap hazards. Secure the strut to the panel pocket using a pin and R-clip. Pins should be inserted from the outside of the panel. Once all struts are installed, then the opposing panel can be lowered over the top of the struts and secured in place, again ensuring the fingers are kept away from pinch points. Care should be taken to ensure the panel strut pockets line up with the struts. The panel should then be secured using pins and R-clips. Should the required width for the trench box system be over 2 meters, then it is recommended to build up the box differently to minimise the need to work at height. In this alternative method, the strut should be built up as before. This panel should now be flipped over. To do this, simply chock in front of the cutting edge on the panel and attach 2 chain legs to the upper panel lift point. The panel can then be lowered so the strut ends slot within the pockets of the panel lying on the floor, allowing the final connecting pins to be installed at ground level, minimising the need to work at height. If a top box is required, this should be built up in the same fashion. MGF trench boxes can take up to 2 top boxes for the maximum depth. Please refer to MGF technical files for specific details. Prior to installation, the trench box base and top should be stored so they are stable. This may change dependent on panel type and overall width. Prior to excavating commencing, the ground should be scanned for surfaces. This animation will detail how to install a trench box using a dig and push method. This is the most common method of installing trench boxes. Other methods are available. Refer to MGF temporary works designs or safe systems of work. Installation should commence by digging up to a maximum of 1 meter depth. The pre-assembled trench box base can now be moved into a vertical position, ready to be installed into the trench. It is not recommended to store the trench box in this position until it is about to be installed. Throughout this operation, it is essential to adhere to the safe working zones. The assembled trench box can now be carefully lowered into the trench using a 4-leg chain. Consideration must be given to the open ends of trench boxes. During installation, the open ends should be battered back at a suitable angle for the ground conditions. It is recommended that open ends of trench runs be closed off using end-safe panels, especially if space is restricted on site. Battered ends should not be used to access the excavation. Only access the box via a suitably secured ladder placed within the box. The excavator should now dig within the trench box, being mindful not to impact the panels or the struts. Locate the spoil a suitable enough distance away not to impose a surcharge onto the excavation. The excavator bucket can now push on the top corners of the trench box in a slow, steady motion. It is recommended to push on opposite corners to progressively push the box down in no more than 300mm increments. This method should be repeated until the top of the panels is roughly 200mm above the ground. If a top box is required, this should be installed onto the base now by simply lowering the top onto the base using a 4-leg chain. Refer to MGF technical files for details on the relevant base to top connection. Ensure that the chains are taut and the machine is isolated prior to connecting the base to the top. Be aware of finger trap hazards throughout this process. In this case, the connector component should sleeve within the connectors on the base panel, before being secured in place using a base to top connection pin and R-clip. The pins should be inserted from the outside, with the R-clip being installed on the inside of the box. It is essential that this be done from a position of safety. At no point should any operative be leaning over the excavation. The remaining connection pins can now be installed prior to removing the lifting chains. The installation can now continue as before by digging and pushing in 300mm increments until the box is at the required depth. Flying of the box above the base of the excavation is not recommended. Once the box is at the required depth, the safety equipment can now be installed. End-safe panels can now be assembled and installed. End-safe panels should not be driven into the ground and installed in a dig-and-place method. Up to 2 end-safe panels can be connected together. Refer to the MGF technical file for achievable configurations and MGF Safe System of Work guidance for assembly and installation details. The end-safe panel should be carefully lifted into a vertical position using a 2-leg chain before being lowered up against the end of the trench box. Ensure that the panels are at formation level and bear a minimum of 75mm onto the end of each of the trench box panels. The remaining safety equipment can now be installed, such as edge safe, ladder safe and davit safe. If further trench boxes are required, then these should be installed now. Once the works is complete, the removal process can begin. Firstly, all safety ancillaries should be removed. Ensure a safe zone for storing equipment is agreed prior. Prior to extracting the trench box, it is essential that each of the extraction points be thoroughly inspected. It is critical that the extraction chain hook be attached to the designated extraction points on the panel. A suitably rated single leg extraction chain must be used on the boxes to break the adhesion between the panel and the ground. The excavator must now apply a steady vertical load at each corner of the panel to remove any adhesion. When working within the restricted zone of the excavator, please ensure a safe system of work is established and communicated to those involved. Once this is completed, then the box should be progressively removed by filling between the panels with backfill and lifting until the top box is above ground level. If the box becomes stuck, do not force it. Stop work immediately and contact the temporary works coordinator or temporary work supervisor. The top box can now be removed by removing the connecting pins and lifting off to a clear area. The removal process should continue with the base box until the excavation depth is around 1 metre. The box can then be removed and the remaining backfill inserted within the excavation prior to compacting.